Kaya mamin yoga yakuling nijamaya maya wajat yunga boja yakuling cooperative wearing jedening nuna ngangwa jenjeng ko burawa. Hello everyone, my name is Ingrid Cumming. My maiden name is actually Collard, so I'm from the very famous Collard family here in the southwest. We're Wajak Noongar peoples and with connection to many other areas across the southwest and through the Pilbara and through the Kimberley. Probably the reason why I married a Tasmanian, good 3 states in between anyone I'm related to. But the point is that I want to welcome you to Noongar country, the traditional way of welcoming where someone from country will say certain words to spirit and to you to make sure that you are looked after and you're cared for as you go through our country, and to join hand in hand with us as we walk through country as well. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about NoongarPedia as it is a reconciliation project, just like when we welcome people to country and we want them to have a sense of connection to country and the understanding. That's what NoongarPedia was all about. But firstly, we probably should talk a bit about Noongar country. So for those who don't know, it is the southwest corridor of Western Australia. So anywhere from, say, south of Geraldton, following in an arc, which you'll see on the PowerPoint, all the way down to Esperance. And everything in that tight little arc in the southwest is known as Noongar Nation. Now, from a Western perspective, Australia is seen as one nation. A couple of you will get that joke. But we see Australia as a continent with hundreds of different nations, Indigenous nations, and dialects within those nations as well. So Noongar has actually 14 different dialects. I speak Wajak, but if I spoke to my Minang brothers and sisters in the Great Southern near Albany, there is actually some differences in dialogue. So this is one of the challenges we face as NoongarPedia, but for those who are wondering what is Noongar Nation, well, that's what it is. The next slide shows a picture of Aboriginal Australia. So when I talked about this continent, I really did mean like a continent. So Noongar Nation going from the southwest to, say, Yamaji country, which is north of Geraldton along the coast, or Ngamrala country, which is in Karatha. It literally is like going from England to Japan to Russia. They're different nations, different languages, different histories, different communities, different laws. So I've had the absolute pleasure over 10 years of my career to work in many of those different nations. And a lot of the time people say, well, how do you get to work across so many different places? And it's all about relationships. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the work that NoongarPedia did and such a huge fan of reconciliation. So a little bit about myself as well before I get into the project. I'm the Noongar Cultural Advisor here at Curtin, and my job is to keep progressing our reconciliation journey. We're one of only 2 universities across Australia with the Elevate RAP status, which means we're seen to be the leadership in reconciliation, particularly in the university sector. So things like NoongarPedia, things like the cultural immersion tours, things like our Indigenous cultural capability frameworks, indigenising curriculum is all part of the great role I get to work with all of my colleagues, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, here at Curtin. So NoongarPedia many years ago was one of those projects. It was an Australia Research funded project where it wasn't actually about creating a physical NoongarPedia. It was actually about answering a question first. It was answering the question, well, if Jimmy Wales, who is the founder of Wikipedia, globally, says, every community or every culture should have a Wikipedia in their own language. The ARC funded research asked the question, well, why is there no NoongarPedia? Why is there no Indigenous Australian Wikipedia in history? So that was what we were supposed to answer, but we may have got a little excited and jumped the gun. And in, again, reflecting on how reconciliation is so powerful and working with Wikimedia Australia, all the fantastic editors, the Gideon Digbys, Prue Mitchell, who was the president, Rob, the whole amazing network of non-Indigenous, primarily Wikimedia editors and enthusiasts here, not in just Australia, but now globally after our presentation in Sweden last year. Worked with the Noongar community to understand, well, what is Noongar, who are Noongars, if we're going to put all of this information for free use and for everybody to look at, how do they feel about that, what are the kind of cultural considerations or community considerations, what are the histories we need to think about. So the whole idea with NoongarPedia was to not just answer the question why it's not. Well, I think in the end the answer was because we haven't built it, and we built it. And it was a real exercise in learning each other's worlds to be able to create this incredible digital, online, bilingual Indigenous Australian platform, and which has never been done before. One of the big things we had to do when we first started off the project was, well, you know, what are the steps we need to take to make sure we do this stuff right? So there's a bit of a methodology around Nih, Barrening and Wangi. So the listening, the connecting and the talking. We really had to listen, connect and talk with each other to figure out how we were going to make this thing work. And one of the biggest challenges we faced was the impact of colonisation. So on the slide you'll see one of the maps of the different boundaries and areas where Noongar people oversaw different parts of Whadjuk Noongar country, who were the leaders, and the big statue of Yagan, which people know of. Depending on which particular person's history or reading was either a hero or a villain. And again, the power of NoongarPedia challenging a lot of those pre-colonial narratives. The impact of colonisation, the Cumming and illegal acquisition of land, and you know the colonisation, the assimilation of the not just Noongar but Aboriginal people across Australia, meant that Aboriginal people, Noongar people, couldn't walk the song lines, couldn't speak the language, couldn't go to the places of ceremony, because the idea was that we were to be saved from this, you know, subhuman sort of feral kind of existence of subhuman, basically. So access to language was cut off, access to culture was cut off. And for a long time, the only people that were really keeping record of the culture was actually non-Indigenous people. So you'll see things from Savaldo, from Daisy Bates, from Armstrong, all these early colonial settlers and explorers or invaders, whichever language you want to use, were the ones that took down a lot of the language and took down a lot of information. So remembering Aboriginal Australian culture was primarily an orally transmitted culture. There was no books, there was no writing. So we actually had to, you know, I guess maybe some of the worries of some is that we had to actually use their content, and we had to read through it, we had to understand the perspective of the non-Indigenous persons of the day, what was going on for us, to be able to extract the knowledge. But we also really focused on talking to the survivors of, you know, this assimilation period, talking to the elders, talking to those who had family that, despite all of this attempt to smooth the dying pillow or to kill off the culture and the language, that they persevered. We used all forms of knowledge sources possible to be able to get as much stuff together to figure out, well, you know, how do we frame what this thing will look like. So trust and capacity was really important. We don't have a lot of Noongar people that speak language because of the things that we talked about, you know, to no fault of their own. We do have a lot of trauma, in our communities that impact people of knowing some of the knowledge. We don't have a lot of, Noongar people that are Wikipedians or editors or, work in building encyclopedias. But what we had was a whole bunch of passionate people that wanted to see Noongar culture thrive. It's not just about survival anymore, it's about thriving. And how do we use the digital domain to do that? So the language is still very much alive, as this slide will show you. We have apps, we have Noongar radio, we have Warbing Time, so, Noongar educational-based TV. We have the Noongar Language Centre, we have schools, working on teaching language. We have Noongar language teachers being trained up in the education department. So again, there was this incredible surge of all these different things and places doing stuff to make sure Noongar culture and language stays alive. So rather than having to create content, all we had to do was build the relationships. So do the Nih, do the Barrening, do the Wangi, the connecting and the talking and the listening to find out all those different sources. And we talked to elders and said, how do you feel about certain information going up? And in Noongar culture there's men and women's business. Some stuff shouldn't be on the public domain. Some stuff, there's a certain process that one has to go through to even have that knowledge, or, to be the carrier or the overseer of that knowledge. But largely there is a lot of stuff, and how we combat things like racism and discrimination and, maybe making the mistakes of some of the early colonial visitors, explorers or invaders, whichever you want to call them, is by being able to share the knowledge so they have a better perspective. And again, big part of what reconciliation is all about. So we thought about it and we looked at examples of other Indigenous peoples' Wikipedias. We noticed that the Māori had Māoripedia, which was a big inspiration, but it was all in Māori. There's a lot more language development going on in New Zealand, a lot more people with access, teaching in schools, a lot better collaboration. I'm not an expert on how things are going in New Zealand with Māori, but that's, from our perspective, we weren't there yet. We weren't at that point. And we had to respect the fact that because of those historical factors and because of that assimilation period and because of the trauma and things that are going on, a lot of Noongar people couldn't speak language and we didn't want them to feel segregated from NoongarPedia. We wanted to be able to offer a platform that actually had language resources, had the knowledge where they could still participate and language wasn't a barrier for them, but there was things there to help them develop that skill. At the same time, we didn't want to discourage our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters. These are the mob that we, I know there's more Wadjulas walking with us these days than walking against us. So we want to empower them to be able to access the pedia, read the information, utilise the information, and you never know, Nuna Dawang and Ngangwa, you can talk Noongar with me, which would be amazing. Pretty sure my ancestors don't discriminate, guys, on, your skin colour or, your religion or your football team, although Dockers is a great choice. Maybe not this weekend. But it's about Karkut, we're in good head, heart and spirit. So bilingual was the approach we took. We want to make sure that, yes, there's definitely Noongar and but English also represented and they can work together. So the successes was, well, we actually created it. We weren't supposed to, but we did. And last year I was invited to Sweden to Wikimania, which is the big Wikipedia festival that they have, and everyone shares their work. And they were blown away. They had never seen or heard of anything like it. So now we actually have huge international support. The relationships of all of us working together is really what made NoongarPedia what it is, and we love doing it, and particularly in the area of things like placemaking and community development and bringing community together, that's exactly how things should be done. So the uptake in local government schools, it's being used as a resource more and more. I know Curtin University are looking into how we can develop more programs, as we did with the amazing kids at Hilton Primary School and other schools, where the kids become the finders of the knowledge, the creators of the article, and then the keepers of the knowledge. What the hope is, my old people hope that the future generation do learn the language, do learn the culture, and however they wish to keep it going, whether it be digital domain, the face-to-face, on-country, however, the language still gets spoken, the culture still gets used, and one day maybe we can stand on that world stage and say we are one, because Noongar culture and non-Indigenous culture actually are working together for a better future for all of us. So the website up here will have Noongar word lists, so we empower people to have the access to the information, so the kids can keep developing, or anyone can keep developing their language. But the young people editing, as some of these pages, all these pages up here were created by Year 3 students at Hilton Primary School. These kids learn how to become NoongarPedia editors, to create content, to utilise several different things to be able to create articles, including Wiki Commons, uploading photos, then translated them into Noongar and English, and it was incredible. Like, these kids are barely, 9, 10 years of age, and they did an incredible job. When I was a kid in school, my Indigenous education consisted of an Aboriginal man on the $2 coin and me being told that that's who Aboriginal people are and what they look like. Look nothing like any of the uncles that I had or knew. There was a lot of discrimination. I faced my first bout of racism at 6 years of age, and I truly believe that those things happened because the schools didn't have the resources or the capacity to be able to give kids an authentic learning journey around culture and language. NoongarPedia is probably one of my proudest achievements in my career, because I got to work with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to make sure that future generations of children have a resource so that stuff doesn't continue. NoongarPedia is a fantastic tool. I encourage anyone and everyone to have a look at it, have a play with it, utilise it. But the big takeaway that I want you guys to have is ni, baraning, wangi. When you're working with communities, and particularly around the use of language and culture, always be listening, always be connecting, and always be communicating, and work together for that place we want to be, which is where we stand on that world stage as one. Thank you.